What if I told you that by the time your grandchildren reach their 30th entire cities they grew up in might already be underwater? That crops we once took for granted, corn, wheat, even coffee, may no longer grow in the places we farmed for centuries? This isn't science fiction. It's what NASA, the IPCC, and thousands of climate scientists are warning us about right now. And here's the most chilling part. Even if we stopped all emissions today, the world would still keep heating for decades. Because the damage is already in motion. Oceans are rising, ecosystems collapsing, diseases shifting, and by 2070, large parts of the Earth could become uninhabitable. What does that mean for our families, our future, or the world we promised to leave behind? This is their story. But the real question is, will they forgive us? Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. For most of us living today, the world still seems familiar. The seasons come and go. Summers are hot but manageable. Winters may be milder than before, but life moves on. We drive to work, fly across continents, stream videos, eat strawberries in December. Our cities glow at night, powered by grids that hum with fossil energy, oil, gas, coal, fuels that built the modern age. Technology has never felt more powerful. Artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, carbon capture projects, they give us the illusion that we're in control. That science will save us. That someone, somewhere, is fixing the problem. But beneath this surface of normalcy, the Earth is shifting. Average global temperatures have already risen by over 1.1 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial era. It may sound small, but it's not. That tiny number hides the chaos we're already seeing. Arctic sea ice is melting at unprecedented rates, glaciers are vanishing, oceans are heating and acidifying, coral reefs, once teeming with life, are dying. We're seeing more heat waves, more megafires, more once-in-a-century floods that now happen every few years. And yet, most people still believe climate change is something far away, somewhere in the future, or only affecting polar bears. The truth? It's already here. And our window to act is closing fast. Scientists around the world agree. If we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, we enter a danger zone. At 2 degrees Celsius, we risk triggering tipping points, irreversible chain reactions in the climate system. But we're on track for 2.5 degrees C, or worse, by the end of this century. So the question is no longer if things will change. The question is, how fast, how far, and who will pay the price first? It didn't begin with smoke-filled skies or flooded streets. It started quietly, invisibly, with coal fires in 18th century Britain. The Industrial Revolution, hailed as humanity's greatest leap, unleashed an unstoppable hunger for energy. Factories roared to life, cities expanded, and with each puff of smoke from a chimney, carbon dioxide began its slow, silent climb. In 1859, Irish physicist John Tyndall discovered that certain gases could trap heat in Earth's atmosphere. It was a breakthrough, mostly ignored. Decades later, in 1896, Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius calculated that burning fossil fuels could one day warm the planet. Again, no one listened. Why would they? The world was thriving. But by the mid-20th century, things began to shift. Scientists in Hawaii started tracking atmospheric CO2 and saw it rising year after year. In 1988, NASA's James Hansen testified before the U.S. Senate, declaring that climate change was no longer a theory, it was happening. That was over 35 years ago. And since then, emissions have only increased. The oil industry knew. Their internal documents from the 1970s accurately predicted global warming trends, but the data was buried. Instead of warning the world, they launched misinformation campaigns, casting doubt, buying time. Precious time. And now, the consequences are catching up. What was once theory is now reality. Ice sheets are destabilizing. The Amazon is nearing collapse. Methane is leaking from thawing permafrost. These aren't isolated events. They're symptoms of a planet under pressure, a system unraveling. And yet, most of us live as though we still have time, as though our grandchildren won't inherit the full weight of this crisis. But history is unforgiving, and what started as a whisper of steam 2 centuries ago has become a roar no one can silence. The age of consequences has begun. Imagine the hottest day you can remember. Now imagine that being the average summer temperature. In 2023 alone, over 61,000 people in Europe died due to extreme heat. Phoenix, Arizona saw 31 consecutive days above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. In India, asphalt melted. In Canada, wildfires scorched over 45 million acres, an area larger than Greece, sending toxic smoke across the Atlantic, choking cities like New York and Washington. These aren't isolated disasters. They're part of a new pattern. Climate change isn't coming. It's accelerating. The oceans, once our planet's thermostat, are now absorbing over 90% of the excess heat caused by greenhouse gases. But warm water expands, and sea levels are rising faster than expected. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, parts of the U.S. East Coast could see over a foot of sea level rise by 2050. Miami, Charleston, New Orleans, cities beloved for their culture and history, are among the first in line. But it doesn't stop at flooding. With rising heat, crops begin to fail. The IPCC warns that by 2050, global corn yields could drop by 24%. Wheat, down 17%. Staple foods, disappearing. Meanwhile, diseases are moving. Mosquitoes carrying malaria and dengue are creeping north. Ticks, once confined to warmer regions, are now thriving in places like Maine and Minnesota. And if that's not enough, the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average, releasing ancient viruses and bacteria from permafrost, microorganisms humanity hasn't encountered in over 10,000 years. These changes are not abstract. They're measurable, traceable, and undeniable. Scientists can now link specific extreme events directly to climate change, meaning we can no longer claim ignorance or coincidence. The danger isn't distant. It's here, it's growing, and it's coming for the systems we depend on every single day. Here's something most people don't know. Climate change doesn't just heat the planet, it reshapes it. Literally, as glaciers melt, trillions of tons of weight are lifted from Earth's crust, and the land beneath begins to rise and shift. Coastlines change. Even the Earth's axis is wobbling, just slightly, but measurably, because of redistributing water masses. This isn't science fiction. NASA confirmed it. We're not just altering weather, we're altering the very mechanics of the planet. But perhaps even more terrifying is this. Scientists have identified what they call tipping points, critical thresholds in the climate system that, once crossed, trigger irreversible changes. The West Antarctic ice sheet, the Amazon rainforest, the Atlantic Ocean's current system, which keeps Europe warm and stable, all are dangerously close to collapse. And once they fall, there's no going back. The Amazon, for example, produces its own rainfall, but deforestation and warming are pushing it toward a dry savanna-like state. If it dies, it won't come back. And with it, we lose one of Earth's largest carbon sinks. Here's the twist. These tipping points don't operate in isolation. They're connected. If one triggers, it can push others over the edge in a domino effect. A phenomenon known as tipping cascades. One event could spiral into planetary-scale transformation. And it could all start silently. No alarms. No breaking news. Just a slow shift until it's too late. Scientists argue over when, exactly, we'll hit those thresholds. Some say decades. Others warn we might already be past some. The uncertainty is what makes it even more dangerous. Because when the system is this complex and this fragile, even small pushes can change everything. So the real question isn't whether we'll cross a line. It's whether we've already stepped over it, without even realizing. Today, we know more about Earth's climate than at any point in human history. Satellites orbiting the planet track temperature changes, ice loss, ocean currents, and carbon emissions in near real time. Supercomputers run climate models that simulate thousands of possible futures, based on different human actions. These models aren't guesses. They're grounded in physics, chemistry, and decades of data. And their predictions are getting more precise. We now understand the fine-scale dynamics of things like cloud feedback, soil carbon cycles, and deep ocean heat transfer. Scientists can even detect how individual hurricanes are intensified by warming oceans. But beyond observation, there's innovation. Researchers are developing advanced materials that pull carbon directly from the air, called direct air capture. Others are working on gene-edited crops that can survive extreme heat and drought. There are even experiments in solar geoengineering, reflecting sunlight back into space to cool the Earth artificially. It's controversial, but a sign of how desperate some scientists believe we may become. In Antarctica, autonomous robots are mapping the underside of melting glaciers, revealing hidden rivers of warm water accelerating collapse. In the Arctic, drones and sensors measure methane leaks from thawing permafrost, trying to understand just how close we are to unleashing this potent greenhouse gas. Every year, the science grows stronger, the warnings louder. But the gap between what we know and what we do remains dangerously wide. Technology gives us tools, but not time. It can help slow the damage, but it can't undo what's already set in motion. And while science races forward, politics often stands still. The real question is, will we use these breakthroughs to change course or simply to study the crash as it happens in high definition from space? Not everyone agrees on how this ends or even how it began. Some scientists argue that climate collapse will unfold slowly, predictably, giving us time to adapt. Others believe in abrupt shifts, black swan events, where systems break down without warning. There are even theories suggesting we've already triggered a cascade of tipping points, but the effects are still incubating, hidden in the inertia of oceans and atmosphere. One school of thought sees technology as salvation. Fusion energy, carbon capture, AI-optimized agriculture, solutions that could stabilize the planet and preserve civilization. But others warn, we've said this before, every stage of industrial progress promised salvation and brought new consequences. Fossil fuels lifted billions from poverty, while quietly poisoning the sky. The Green Revolution ended famine and drained rivers dry. Now we pin our hopes on machines to fix what machines have broken. But progress has a shadow. Geoengineering could backfire, disrupting monsoons, damaging crops, or shifting climate disasters from one part of the world to another. Carbon markets, once seen as a path to sustainability, are now riddled with loopholes and corruption. And then there's the ethical debate. What if saving the climate means sacrificing growth? Comfort? Freedom? Who decides what's fair? Who bears the cost? Nations argue. Corporations delay. People divide. And all the while, emissions rise. The planet warms. And we tell ourselves a story of control, of mastery over nature. But what if the truth is, we were never in control? What if the planet doesn't care about our technology, our borders, our plans? What if we've crossed a line, not just in temperature, but in morality? In this moment, this razor's edge between action and collapse, we must ask, are we still shaping the future or simply bracing for impact? The numbers are no longer abstract. Entire nations are already on the front lines. In Bangladesh, rising seas are swallowing villages, forcing millions into crowded slums. In sub-Saharan Africa, children walk farther each year for water. In the American West, rivers are vanishing, Lake Mead, once vast, now shrinking to dust. And in small island nations, leaders are already planning mass evacuations, not in decades, but now. The climate crisis is not about the future, it's about justice. Those who contributed least are suffering the most. The richest 1% of humanity emit more carbon than the poorest 50%. And when climate-fueled disasters strike, floods, fires, droughts, it's the vulnerable who lose homes, livelihoods, lives. Scientists, once cautious in tone, now speak with urgency. Some call it the beginning of a mass extinction, where ecosystems unravel faster than we can understand them. Coral reefs, which support a quarter of all marine life, could vanish within a generation. Pollinators, bees, butterflies are in decline, threatening food systems worldwide. The planet is not just warming, it's destabilizing. And the ripple effect is everywhere. Climate refugees are on the rise, fueling political tension. Insurance companies are pulling out of high-risk regions. Banks are quietly preparing for stranded assets, billions locked in fossil fuels that can never be burned. And yet, amid the chaos, we adapt. Farmers shift crops. Cities plant trees. Engineers build seawalls. But these are bandages on a bleeding wound. The real threat, the one few dare name, isn't just heat or storms. It's collapse. Of systems. Of stability. Of trust. What happens when the structures we depend on, food, water, energy, governance, begin to fail? What happens when nature turns unfamiliar and we are no longer at the top of the chain? That moment isn't coming. It has already begun. So now we stand at the edge, not of the world, but of the world as we know it. Everything we've built, our cities, our science, our comfort, has brought us here, to a choice, not one made by governments or scientists alone, but by all of us. Do we continue down this path, hoping technology will bail us out, while emissions rise, ecosystems fall, and inequality deepens? Or do we stop, look honestly at what we've done, and change course, radically, urgently, together? Because make no mistake, survival is no longer just about innovation. It's about restraint, about choosing what not to build, what not to burn, what not to ignore. The climate crisis is not just a scientific challenge, it's a moral one. It asks who we are and who we're willing to become. Are we the species that consumes without end, or the one that adapts, that learns, that protects what matters most? There is still time, but not much. Every fraction of a degree matters. Every action we take today can shape what kind of world our grandchildren inherit. One filled with suffering or with resilience. One where humanity fractures or finds purpose. And perhaps that is the final evolution we face. Not one of machines or genes, but of consciousness, of values, of priorities. The Earth will go on. Life will adapt. The real question is whether we will still be part of its story. This isn't just about saving the planet. It's about saving the part of ourselves that remembers how to care, that refuses to look away, and that dares to choose differently. Remember how this began? With a simple question: what kind of world will your grandchildren inherit? Back then, maybe it felt distant, theoretical. But now, can you feel how close it really is? This story isn't about someone else. It's about you, your home, your street, your legacy. And if all of this, the science, the data, the rising seas and burning forests, still feels too big to hold in your hands, then hold this. The future is not written yet. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm just one voice. One person who's seen the facts and can't stay silent. Because I'm scared too. Not of the planet dying, but of us forgetting how to care. Of becoming numb, distracted, passive. And I wonder, do you feel it too? That quiet fear, when the weather feels wrong, when a season doesn't come, when your child asks, why is the sky so orange? This isn't just a crisis of carbon. It's a crisis of connection. And maybe the most radical thing we can do is feel again. To pay attention. To ask questions. To act, imperfectly, but urgently. So tell me, what do you see when you imagine the year 2070? What stories will they tell about us? About the moment we stood at the edge and chose to step back or forward? Leave a comment. Share your fear, your hope, your memory of a planet you once knew. Because this isn't just a story. It's a warning, a mirror, a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, what comes next is still up to us.